All right, this is the problem that Mr. Anderson left on the first YouTube video you were supposed to watch, and he probably left some of you hanging and you were like, wait, I wanted to check my answer. So in this problem here, we have 12% of a population that has red hair, and it's asking what percent of this population is homozygous for non-red hair. Now remember, we're going to use the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium equations to figure out the allele frequencies for the population. Just so you understand where we're coming from, we have a population in Ireland, and so there's 100% of people in Ireland, okay? Now 12% of those people have red hair. So that means 88% of that population doesn't have red hair. Now this problem is asking, what percent of this population is homozygous for not red hair? Now if you remember from the Bozeman video, red hair is recessive. So 12% of the population has 2 recessive alleles. But that means 88% of the population is a mixture between having 2 dominant alleles, being homozygous dominant, and being heterozygous. And if they have not red hair, we're not really sure which one is which. So we have to solve the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium equation, separating dominant from recessive alleles to help us figure this out. So that is precisely what we are going to do. So be patient with me while I erase. Thank you so much. All right, we have 12% of the people in Ireland have red hair. So essentially what we have is almost Q squared. Remember, we are always supposed to start by finding Q squared, which is the frequency of homozygous recessive individuals. Well, we don't have a frequency yet. We know that 12% of the population is homozygous recessive. If we want to make that a frequency, we have to make it a decimal point, which literally just means taking the 12 and dividing by 100, which is a percentage. Essentially, if you see 12%, you know that you're just going to move your decimal place over 2, and our frequency is 0.12. So if you don't know what you're doing there, it's literally just 12 divided by 100. That's how you calculate these percentages. So now that we have our Q squared equals 0.12, we now know the frequency of individuals with red hair in Ireland. Now, what's the next thing we can solve after Q squared? If you guessed Q, you were right. Remember, we take, not Q squared. In order to solve for Q, we just take the square root of whatever we got for Q squared. So that means we're going to grab our calculators now, and we are going to plug into our calculators the square root of 0.12. So go ahead and do that with me now. I'm typing in the square root of 0.12, and I end up with 0.3, and I am going to round it to 0.5. You might have gotten 0.346 or something like that. I'm just rounding it. Now this rounding error does lead to a little bit of inaccuracies, I'm just letting you know, but since we're learning from home, let's just, agree to round and not worry about inaccuracies that much. So now we have Q. Remember, once we have Q, we can find P by doing the equation P plus Q equals 1. So that would be P plus 0.35, which we just calculated, equals 1. We subtract 0.35 from both sides, and we end up with a p-value, which equals, and I'm subtracting this as we speak, 1 minus 0.35 in my calculator, I get 0.65. Well, now I have Q and I have P, so I have everything I need to solve the rest of the problem. Now this problem is specifically asking me to calculate the frequency or the percentage of the population that is homozygous for non-red hair. So is it asking me for 2pq or is it asking me for p squared? If you guess that it's asking me for p squared, you're correct. So all we have to do now that we have p is just square it. Or if you're like me, I'm going to, in my really simple calculator, do 0.65 times 0.65. It's the same thing. When I calculate that, I end up with 0.65 times 0.65. I end up with 0.42. as my p-squared number. Now this is a frequency. If you go back to the problem, you always have to review what the problem's actually asking you for. This problem is actually asking you for the percent of the population that's homozygous dominant. Well, that just means you multiply by 100. That's how we always calculate percents. So basically what we're saying is that 42% of the population in Ireland is homozygous dominant for non-red hair. I hope this helped you. And now we're going to do one more practice problem before I let you work on your own.